On Friday, April 10th, I dined with Johnson at General Oglethorpe's, where we found Dr. Goldsmith. Our memorial bearings having been mentioned, Johnson said they were as ancient as the siege of Thebes, which he proved by a passage in one of the tragedies of Euripides. I started the question whether dueling was consistent with moral duty. The brave old general fired at this and said, with a lofty air, "Undoubtedly a man has a right to defend his honor." Goldsmith said, turning to me, "I ask you first, sir, what would you do if you were affronted?" I answered I should think it necessary to fight. "Why then," replied Goldsmith, "that solves the question." Johnson said, "No, sir, it does not solve the question. It does not follow that what a man would do is therefore right." I said I wished to have it settled whether dueling was contrary to the laws of Christianity. Johnson immediately entered on the subject and treated it in a masterly manner. And so far as I have been able to recollect, his thoughts were these: "Sir, as a man becomes a high degree refined, various causes of offense arise, which are considered to be of such importance that life must be staked to atone for them, though in reality they are not so. A body that has received a very fine polish may be easily hurt. Before men arrive at this artificial refinement, if one tells his neighbor tells him he lies. If one gives his neighbor a blow, his neighbor gives him a blow. But in a state of highly polished society, an affront is held to be a serious injury. It must therefore be resented, or rather a duel must be fought upon it, as men have agreed to banish from their society one who puts up with an affront without fighting a duel. Now, sir, it is never unlawful to fight in self-defense. He, then, who fights a duel, does not fight from passion against his antagonist, but out of self-defense, to avert the stigma of the world and to prevent himself from being driven out of society. I could wish there was not that superfluity of refinement. But while such notions prevail, no doubt a man may lawfully fight a duel. Let it be remembered that this justification is applicable only to the person who receives an affront. All mankind must condemn the aggressor. All right. The general told us that when he was a very young man, I think only 15, serving under Prince Eugene of Savoy, he was sitting in a company at table with the Prince of Wurtemberg. The prince took up a glass of wine and, by a fillip, made some of it fly into Oglethorpe's face. Here was a nice dilemma. To have challenged him instantly might have fixed a quarrelsome character upon the young soldier. To have taken no notice of it might have been considered as cowardice. Oglethorpe, therefore, keeping his eye upon the prince, and smiling all the time, as if he took what his highness had done in jest, said, "Mon prince." I forget the French words to be used. The purport, however, was, "That's a good joke, but we do it much better in England," and threw a whole glass of wine in the prince's face. An old general who sat by said, "Eh bien fait, mon prince, voulez-vous commence?" And that's all ended in good humor. Dr. Johnson said, "Pray, General, give us an account of the siege of Belgrade. Upon which the general, pouring a little wine upon the table, described everything with a wet finger. Here we were, here were the Turks, and etc., etc. Johnson listened with the closest attention. A question was started how far people who disagree in any capital point can live in friendship together. Johnson said they might. Goldsmith said they could not, as they had not the idem velle antique idem nole, the same likings and the same aversions. Johnson said, Why, sir, you must shun the subjects as to which you disagree. For instance, I can live very well with Burke. I love his knowledge, his genius, his diffusion, and effluence of conversation, but I would not talk to him of the Rockingham party. Goldsmith said, But, sir, when people live together who have something as to which they disagree, and which they want to shun, they will be in the situation mentioned in the story of Bluebeard. You may look into all chambers but one, but we should have the greatest inclination to look into that chamber, to talk of that subject. Johnson said with a loud voice, Sir, I am not saying that you could live in friendship with a man from whom you differ as to some point. I am only saying that I could do it. You put me in mind of Sappho in Ovid. Goldsmith told us that he was now busy in writing a natural history, and that he might have full leisure for it. He had taken lodgings at a farmer's house near to the 6 milestone on the Edgware Road, and had carried down his books in 2 return post-chaises. He said he believed the farmer's family thought him an odd character, similar to that in which the Spectator appeared to his landlady and his children. He was the gentleman. Mr. Mickle, the translator of the Lusiad, and I went to visit him at this place a few days afterwards. He was not at home, but having a curiosity to see his apartment, we went in and found curious scraps of descriptions of animals scrawled upon the walls with a black lead pencil. The subject of ghosts being introduced, Johnson repeated what he had told me of a friend of his, an honest man and a man of sense, having asserted to him that he had seen an apparition. Goldsmith told us he was assured by his brother, the Reverend Mr. Goldsmith, that he also had seen one. General Oglethorpe told us that Prendergast, an officer in the Duke of Marlborough's army, had mentioned to many of his friends that he should die on a particular day, that upon that day a battle took place with the French, that after it was over, and Prendergast was still alive, his brother officers, while they were yet in the field, jestingly asked him where was his prophecy now. Prendergast gravely answered, I shall die, notwithstanding what you see. Soon afterwards there came a shot from a French battery, to which the orders for cessation of arms had not yet reached, and he was killed upon the spot. Colonel Cecil, who took possession of his effects, found in his pocketbook the following solemn entry. Here the date. Dreamt or... Here was a blank which may be filled up thus. Was told by an apparition, the writer being probably uncertain whether he was asleep or awake, when his mind was impressed with the solemn presentiment with which the fact afterwards happened so wonderfully to correspond. Sir John Friends meets me. Here the very date on which he was killed was mentioned. Prendergast had been connected with Sir John Friend, who was executed for high treason. General Oglethorpe said he was in company with Colonel Cecil when Pope came and inquired into the truth of this story, which made a great noise at the time and was then confirmed by the colonel. On Saturday, April 11th, I believe Johnson appointed me to come to him in the evening when he should be at leisure to give me some assistance for the defense of Hasty, the schoolmaster of Campbelltown, for whom I was to appear in the House of Lords. When I came, I found him unwilling to exert himself. I pressed him to write down his thoughts upon the subject. He said, There is no occasion for my writing. I'll talk to you. He was, however, at last prevailed on to dictate me what I write as follows. The charge is that he had used immoderate and cruel correction. Correction in itself is not cruel. Children, being not reasonable, can be governed only by fear. To impress this fear is therefore one of the first duties of those who have the care of children. It is this duty of a parent, and has never been thought inconsistent with parental tenderness. It is the duty of a master, who is the highest exaltation when he is loco parentis, in the place of a parent. Yet, as good things become evil by excess, correction, by being immoderate, may become cruel. But when is correction immoderate? When it is more frequent or more severe than is required ad momendum et docidam for reformation and instruction. No severity is cruel, which obstinacy makes necessary. For the greatest cruelty would be to desist, and leave the scholar too careless for instruction and too much hardened for reproof. Locke, in his Treatise of Education, mentions a mother, with applause, who whipped an infant 8 times before she had subdued it. For had she stopped at the 7th act of correction, her daughter, says he, would have been ruined. The degrees of obstinacy in young minds are very different. As different must be the degrees of persevering severity. A stubborn scholar must be corrected till he is subdued. The discipline of a school is military. There must be either unbounded license or absolute authority. The master who punishes not only consults the future happiness of him who is the immediate subject of correction, but he propagates obedience through the whole school, and establishes regularly by exemplary justice. The victorious obstinacy of a single boy would make his future endeavors of reformation or instruction totally ineffectual. Obstinacy, therefore, must never be victorious. Yet it is well known that there sometimes occurs a sullen and hardy resolution that laughs at all common punishment and bids defiance to all common degrees of pain. Correction must be proportioned to occasions. The flexible will be reformed by gentle discipline, and the refractory must be subdued by harsher methods. The degree of scholastic as of military punishment no stated rules can ascertain, and must be enforced till it overpowers temptation, till stubbornness becomes flexible, and perversiveness regular. Custom and reason have, indeed, set some bounds to scholastic penalties. The schoolmaster inflicts no capital punishments, nor enforces his edicts by either death or mutilation. The civil law has wisely determined that a master who strikes at a scholar's eye shall be considered as criminal. But punishments, however severe, that produce no lasting evil, may be just and reasonable, because they may be necessary. Such have been the punishments used by the respondent. No scholar has gone from him either blind or lame, or with any of his limbs or powers injured or impaired. They were irregular, and he punished them. They were obstinate, and he enforced his punishments. But, however provoked, he never exceeded the limits of moderation, for he inflicted nothing beyond present pain, and how much of that was required no man is so little able to determine as those who have determined against him, the parents of the offenders. It has been said that he used unprecedented and improper instruments of correction. Of this accusation the meaning is not very easy to be found. No instrument of correction is more proper than another, but as it is better adapted to produce present pain without lasting mischief. Whatever were his instruments, no lasting mischief has ensued, and therefore, however unusual, in hands so cautious they were proper. It has been objected that this respondent admits the charge of cruelty by producing no evidence to confute it. Let it be considered that his scholars are either dispersed at large in the world, or continue to inhabit the place in which they were bred. Those who are dispersed cannot be found. Those who remain are the sons of his prosecutors, and are not likely to support a man to whom their fathers are enemies. If it be supposed that the enmity of their fathers proves the justice of the charge, it must be considered how often experience shows us that men who are angry on one ground will accuse on another. With how little kindness in a town of low trade, a man who lives by learning is regarded, and how implicitly, where the inhabitants are not very rich, a rich man is hearkened to and followed. In a place like Campbelltown, it is easy for one of the principal inhabitants to make a party. It is easy for the party to heat themselves with imaginary grievances. It is easy for them to oppress a man poorer than themselves, and natural to assert the dignity of riches by persisting in oppression. The argument which attempts to prove the impropriety of restoring him to his school by alleging that he had lost the confidence of the people is not the subject of juridical consideration, for he is to suffer, if he must suffer, not for their judgment, but for his own actions. It may be convenient for them to have another master, but it is a convenience of their own making. It would be likewise convenient for him to find another school, but this convenience he cannot obtain. The question is not what is now convenient, but what is generally right. If the people of Campbelltown be distressed by the restoration of the respondent, they are distressed only by their own fault, by turbulent passions and unreasonable desires, by tyranny, which law has defeated, and by malice, which virtue has surmounted. This, sir, said Johnson, you are to turn in your mind, and make the best use of it you can in your speech. Well, Johnson, you've convinced me. Corporal punishment is the way to go. Of our friend Goldsmith, Johnson said, Sir, he is so much afraid of being unnoticed that he often talks merely lest you should forget that he is in the company. I said, Yes, he stands forward. Johnson said, True, sir. But if a man is to stand forwards, he should wish to do it not in an awkward posture, not in rags, not so as he shall only be exposed to ridicule. I said, For my part, I like very well to hear honest Goldsmith talk away carelessly. Johnson said, Why, yes, sir, but he should not like to hear himself. I think I'll call it quits for today, because it'll be the start of the next day, when next we meet. Until next time, bye from Boswell.